And it isn't true anymore, this particular joke, but I'm not going to have to tell you it anyway. A young farmer went into the library and he said, I need a book so that I can find out how to make farming profitable. And you know, the librarian said, well, that'll be in the fiction section. But I want to say, that isn't true anymore, because since the price of everything's going up, well, there is quite a deal. Even the commodity went up, but so did machinery and fertilizer. All this is going up. So
what kind of relative fuel?
Huh? And fuel is a dandy. It really gets you. We used to burn diesel on our irrigation well, and my third on my wells was, that was just for 2 wells. For the summer was $96,000 bucks. That was just for diesel fuel. Now, and of course, you know, the first and foremost drive everybody has, of course, is food. And of course, that's where the farmer comes in. The original farmer was raising it for himself. He wasn't raising it for other people, and he was surviving. And one of the first things he did, he would punch a hole in the ground and he'd stick a seed in there and hope it would come up. And then finally, after millions of years, or maybe thousands, I better say, they discovered that planting would grow better in soil that was loosened. So they decided they better do something about it. So they used sticks and bones and shells to try to plow up the chunks of earth so they could get their seeds in the ground. And this was probably about 8,000 years ago when man first made some type of a plow. And he sharpened one prong on a forked branch to turn the soil, and probably hitched his wife to the other prong. And he guided the implement by holding it to the stump of the branch while his wife pulled. Later, he got an oxen to do it. So that's the reason we had wives, I think. Now, the first plow that anybody ever thought of was about 1819. A guy by the name of Jethro Wood actually developed a wooden plow, and actually the idea of this plow is still used in moldboard plowing. Now, I'm going to take off here, and probably Bob is going to do something too. But Bob and I both grew up back in the early 40s on the farm, and I remember, of course, our main implement that we used was a one-way plow, and that was you would plow one way around the field. That's the reason they call it a one-way. You couldn't go backwards. You always had to go forwards. And you always made a turn, and it had discs on it, and these discs would cut into the soil, turn the soil over, and then this, prior to that, people that came here and settled here from Iowa and Illinois, they'd been used to these moldboard plows like Jethro Wood had done, and they were plowing the ground and thought, boy, this is the way to do it. Now, my dad, back in 1910, his dad was a watermelon grower, and they always, when they break the soil out, the sod, they break the sod, that was the most fertile part of the ground in the beginning, so they'd always plant watermelons on it. And his dad then would wait till these watermelons were ripe enough, and they had a very crude way of getting the seeds. They were mainly after the seeds. And he told me that they would take a stock tank and they'd put the watermelons in it, and he and his brother would get in there and tromp around, just beat the tar out of it, and then they sift off the all the stuff that wasn't seeds, and then they'd let the seeds dry, and then they'd sell them to this seed company, and they, of course, thousands of pounds of seed was sent back east. He always made a remark that when they took their overalls off at night and hung them on the line, and of course it was hot summer, you know, next morning it'd be like starch, just stiff as they could be with that watermelon juice in them. But then after they had that crop, they would sometimes, the first thing was turkey red wheat. And of course, we know the Mennonites brought those things here in 1873 from when they came over from Russia. Most of them were Germans that had been sent there by Captain the Great said to these German Mennonites that if you come over to Russia, we'll promise that your sons will never be conscripted into the army. So that's how come the Mennonites went to Russia. And she said, for 100 years, I promise you, your children will never be in the army. Well, that after a few years when she died, of course that changed, and that's when they started coming to the United States, and that was about 1872, and they brought this turkey red wheat over here along with the thistle, and that's where we get the tumbleweed today. It all come from back there. Blessings on the Mennonites who brought that with them. And another thing that came in early days was Capricorn, and this particular grain was similar to Milo, only it was tall. It was probably, it could get as high as 5-6 foot tall, and then the old head would turn over kind of like that at harvest time, and they would bind this feed, cut it with a binder, put it in bundles, and then they would mainly, I know my dad used to sell these. He owned the Oliver store. His building is still there. It's a pool hall on the south side of the tracks. That was where he was for 30 years. And they sold a thing that you could put on a combine right on the header, and instead of the sickle laying this way, it laid this way. And you could take your bundle and you could go like this, and it would knock the head off. The head would go into the canvas that was going into the combine, and it would trash off everything and separate the grain, and that's how they would do the grain. Then a great invention came along, and that was called crook-neck maize. Then somebody developed, after a few years, dwarf Milo. And this Milo was about that tall. And that's what we have today. So it took a few years, and I'm sure Bob remembered when that would first come out. It was a miracle to see that little short stuff. Westland, Milo. What the name of it was. Yeah, that was one of the first ones. But anyway, I'll come back and I'll let him start in a minute. I think the big thing was how they learned the way they were farming was what caused this dust bowls, because no one had any idea that you should leave trash or residue on top of the ground. That didn't really come about until the Soil Conservation Service and Kansas State and other land-grant colleges throughout this Midwest told them, hey, you guys, this one lane deal isn't going to work. Actually, one lane went out of style, what would you say, in the 60s? Probably the 60s, yeah. They started the first sweet plow when I was in the 50s. Yeah. Okay, you go ahead now. Well, I'm going to go at this a little different. I was going to tell, and they were farmers and ranchers. The first one, of course, was my granddad Keating, which was Bryce Keating. The reason that he came here was the end of the railroad, 1888. His father was Henry Keating. Henry, and the reason I'll mention that is the Civil War, and I'll tie these together. My mother's folks was Blooms, so I'm related to Fred and that bunch. But what happened in that, Henry was in the Civil War, was in
Andersonville, you know, the prison. And from that, he didn't live very long. So he was dead when my grandfather came here in 1888 at 17 years old. His dad had already passed away, so Henry was gone. The other side of the family was George Bloom.
When did Granddad marry Della?
In 1898 or 99.
And who was she? What was
Della
her name?
Hitch.
Yeah, she's J.K. Hitch's daughter.
Yes.
So he's related to all the Hitches.
Yeah, you couldn't talk about anybody, probably what you find about that I wasn't related. But anyway, I was telling you about George Bloom, and I take this, I found out if you do research, go to obituaries, because they are very good to get information off of. Anyway, George served in the Civil War. He was in the 32nd Indiana Volunteers Infantry Company C. He served 2 years and 8 months, was discharged in Texas December 26, 1865. And the reason I bring that up, he was discharged in Texas and he rode across western Kansas coming up here. So he saw this country in 1865. And I read another thing in research that I was with, you know about Bent's Fort out here. The son of William Bent was part Indian, and he went back to the Cheyenne. In his writings, he brought 1,000 Cheyenne across western Kansas. When? December 1865. So he may have seen them. I don't know if he did. There's no way of knowing, but they were pretty close. But just some information about history. Of course, he was born in Germany, Baden, Germany. I was in Germany for 2 years. I was in the infantry. I walked by the Baden sign for 2 years and never had one idea that he was from there. I remember seeing the sign, still see it today. Baden, Germany that way. I never had any idea about it. But anyway, my grandfather was Willis E. Bloom. And of course he was born in 1871, 70, because Grandpa Keating was born in 1871. They were very close. And some of you will probably know, have known the Blooms, of course, here in the community. They've been here for a long time. But Grandpa Bloom came out here in 1907 on the railroad, and he brought everything with him. They said he brought chickens and horses and everything when they come out here, and that wasn't uncommon. I guess they did that at that time. But he settled on the home place was out here off the northwest corner of the airport, across the road. Fred farms it now. It's on irrigation. And that's where they settled then in 1907. And of course, he lived and worked here in Seward County until his death in '58. Some interesting other sidelights in what happened in some of the things that went on. I know they told a story about Grandpa that during the dirty 30s things were really tough, of course, and for some reason he had sold a cow to his neighbor, and he got to thinking about it, and he said, well, he had given him too much money for the cow, so he went over and gave him back part of the money that he had given to him, because he thought, well, he didn't have any more money than he did, so that and that was a true story. But he was quite a man. Of course, I spent a lot of time on the farm with Grandpa and Grandma Bloom. Of course, my other grandpa was gone at that time. Grandpa Keating was gone at that time. Some other interesting things that happened, of course, when Grandpa Keating came here, he was in the tin business or hardware business, And I happen to have a few checks from, they aren't from the first time it was here, but later on, but they're from 1916. Shows kind of what the checks are. I'll pass them around, you take a look at it. Notice the handwriting. I didn't get that. My wife said I got kicked out on it. But take a look at them and kind of see what that was. I've got another check here that's very interesting. It says Boles Implements. I wonder who did what? 1939.
714.
What did we buy with it? Dad didn't. That's my dad wrote.
All right, I think that was a combine.
Probably.
My dad sold 40 combines in 1939. And I bet that's what that was. 714.
Boy, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of these checks, if you go through the checks, and that's where I get a lot of information. My dad put me on that. He said, go through checks and find out a lot about people with canceled checks. And most of them will be for here, $2.75, you know, $2.75. There's one for $2.30 or something like that, but very small amounts because they didn't have a great lot of money.
Even in 1948, you could buy a new tractor for $800. And this inflation thing never really took off till about 1970, 71, 2 or 3.
When we got a big increase in prices.
Wow.
Yeah. And Paul was talking about the sweep plows. The first sweep plow that we got was probably about 1958 or 9 in the truth there. They had Noble sweep plows that came out, and then of course Tedford down here made a sweep plow, and those got into the stubble mulch farming. Then of course we go into the sprayers, where we spray it and leave the residue on top, and that's the big thing. Of course we got into strip till and all that. That's where you go in and you just work a narrow strip. And that's the only part that you work in the ground is that where you plant it.
Now, you know, you and I both probably have got similar pickup driving times. I started driving, of course, 9 years old, but when I was 12, that was 1945, my dad talked to Harry Massey, who was the chief of police at that time, and said, Paul, I need him to drive a pickup because, you know, help was real hard to get. The war was just about over and there wasn't any extra people. So Harry says, okay, he can drive. So when I drove down 54 Highway, it wasn't much of a highway in those days, and drove right into Light Grain Valley with that old pickup. And in those days, you hauled 60 bushels, about what you'd get on a pickup. And you would spend an hour, sometimes in a field, getting 60 bushels a week. Down across the border here, I remember him talking, my wheat made 40 bushel an acre. Do you remember that guy? He always had, he had more wheat than anybody around. But anyway, we would, these are old pull-type combines, and once you got in the elevator, in order to dump it out, you drive on a deal, and they'd raise that front end up with a pickup, and they'd dump it out, and let it down, and then it wouldn't start. And you'd have to put your foot feet clear down, because it's flooded. Pretty soon it'd start. And so that was the way you dumped wheat. You've done that, haven't you, Bob?
I might, Sharon's not here, so I can tell a story. We had an old Studebaker pickup that was longer than my granddad, and anyway, we acquired it. And I never had any trouble with it. But I would send her to town, and every time she would get in and take a load of wheat in town, it would stop on her. And most of the time it would stop on Kansas Avenue up by Elkham. That's all the farther she'd get, and it wouldn't start. And so somebody get a ride, and she'd come out and get me, and I'd come in and it'd start. I don't know what she did with it, but I never had trouble. But she always had a time with that thing. She never would drive it after about the second or third time it did that. Well, she would never drive it. Talking about things about starting.
I remember when Patsy and I first got married in '54, one of our neighbors was Buck Harrell. You ever heard of Buck Harrell? And Buck, I used to go visit with him, and of course I was just a kid, and he was always making lots of jokes about me and what I did. And he said, "Now, Paul, there's rumor about you guys, you're stealing cattle." What happened was, one time we had cattle out here west of town, and they brought them into the sale, and there was somebody else's cattle that got in with ours, and so we started looking for brands and all that stuff, and I think that's where the story got started. Somebody,
You were rustling.
we were rustling, and so Buck said that the story's out on you. You've been stealing cattle. And then the other was Homer Mercer, and the other one was Bernard Limerick. And now Bernard Limerick was a real pioneer. He came to this country about 1880 and ranched up there beside us. And he was about 5'2", and he probably weighed 100 pounds. And he rode a horse that was probably 14 or 15 hands. Man, it was a tall, skinny horse. And he just looked like a little old kid up on that horse. And so we were bringing Homer Mercer's cattle in from down the river, and I rode beside him. And dummy me, that's when I could have talked to him about history and what all he knew, because he really knew a lot of history. But I didn't. We just visited about the cattle. But another one of the things I want to bring out was, besides this one-way deal, our way we planted milo in those days is completely different than we do now. We had a thing called a lister, and there were 2-row listers, 3-row listers, 4-row listers, and 5-row. Now a 5-row lister was really something. Now you had your furrows 40 inches apart, and I said, why are they 40? Because that originally was designed when you had horses and you were cultivating, the horse fit right in that 40 inches. That's the reason it was 40 inches. And that went on for years. You thought you had to have it. Well, you enlist this ground, and a lot of sandy ground, that's the only way you could hold it from blowing. And then you hope it didn't rain till it got up about like that. Because if it would rain that night, it would sand it over. Then you had to plow it, list it again. I know my old neighbor Ben German one year replanted a field 5 times, and he had a 4-row lister with an old G. John Deere. You've done all that, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been that route.
And then, as time went on, he brought up about the sprayer. And then we brought out no-till planting, no-till drills. And this had a coulter on the front of it that would run along the head of it that would sort of cut any kind of residue as the knife would come along that had the seed behind it. And that is what we use today in a lot of fields where we don't disturb the soil. We've got land right now that we have never run anything on it but no-till equipment, and we do a real good job. We have a lot of residue on it. It doesn't blow, and it's real sandy land. It's in Stevens County, and but that no-till thing is really a great invention that was given the farmer the idea. Everything costs money. Do you realize today a corn planter, for example, that's let's say 40 feet. That's kind of the standard size. There are corn planters that are 90 feet wide. But and by the way, we have farmers today. I have a friend that farms 90 quarter sections of land, and it's all irrigated. He has 10 or 12 hired men, full-time men. That's the type of farming. I just read an article this morning about what the farmer today borrows. Most of them are running into the bank. The bank doesn't have, you have limits. When you have a bank, you have a limit. You can only loan so much. It depends on your capital. So now they're having to get more and larger banks. Some guys that are these big farmers are borrowing like $50 million a year to operate on because seed cost. A sack of corn's how much? Seed corn.
Well, I bought it lately, $125 to $155 the last I bought.
Well, I think it's getting 200.
Yeah, that's probably 200 now.
And it plants 2.5 to 3 acres per bag. In order to plant an acre of corn, about 5 years ago, it was $550 an acre is what it cost to plant 1 acre. So that acre, if it made 200 bushel an acre and corn was $3, that's $600 an acre. But I'm not sure what the prices are now because fertilizer now, how much is it?
I haven't even looked lately. My bill was more this year than I've seen.
Do you know, Don, how much fertilizer is?
No,
Yeah, I know it's
it was around 900.
a ton.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just outrageous what it's got. Now, we haven't brought up this other thing. CRP, Conservation Reserve Practice. This lady right here worked in the ASC office for years. Were you there when the CRP first come out?
I was there for the old soil bank.
Soil bank.
You're an old soil bank
Yeah,
person.
I see the soil bank.
Yeah, the soil bank thing come out about 57 or 8, and this was a great program, especially for this part of the world. That's one reason it stopped the dust storms. And so we can praise the soil conservation people for that particular thing. And a lot of people say, well, you're getting money off the government and blah, 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 and all that stuff. Well, to live in this country, to live pleasantly, it's a lot better that the wind, when it blows, doesn't blow dirt. And you've all experienced dust storms. Maybe that little lady back there and that little lady back there have never seen a real nice dust storm, but they can be lovely. I know, let me tell you about the tornado of 33. In 1933, May the 23rd is when it happened. The day started out sort of dusty. There was a lot of wind blowing. No one had any, we hardly had any radio stations. KGNO had their radio station in Dodge City, but I don't think very few people could get in here. So there was not much weather, and the tornado hit, and it tore through Liberal. It got my dad's store on 2nd Street. He had a store there, and tore it up. It tore the Plaza Theater, the Tucker Theater, the Marquee both blew down. 4 people were killed. One of the guys that was killed was Mark Grossman. Mark was a salesman that worked for my dad. And then when the wind came up, my dad says, Mark, we better go home. I'll take you home. Mark usually walked. And he lived over on the east part of town. And they were driving towards there, and it got so bad my dad couldn't even hardly see. Mark said, well, let me out and I'll follow the curb. Well, the next day they found Mark laying by the curb. A 2x4 came flying through the head, hit him in the head. Well, I had a real coincidental, unusual thing happen. I found an obituary of Mark Grossman and saw he had a son. And I think he had a daughter. Well, I knew this son was a chiropractor at Kingman, Kansas for years, Dr. Grossman, Grossman. Well, about 6 months ago, I was going through Kingman, and I told Patsy, I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask anybody in this town that I find if they've ever heard of Dr. Grossman. So we was driving down the main drag of Kingman, and there was a man walking, and I said, have you ever heard of Dr. Grossman? He said, yeah. I said, well, where is he? Well, he's in the nursing home, and it's up by the hospital. So we drove up there, got in the nursing home, walked in there. I said, "Is Dr. Grossman here?" "Yes." "He's back there in the corner." I said, "Now, you may have to wake him up." Said he's 97 years old. And so I went back there, and here's this little guy. I expect he was 5 foot tall, maybe a little more. And the cutest little old guy you ever saw. And I said, told him who I was, and he says, we talked a little bit. He said, "You know, that was my year I graduated from Liberal High School, 1933. His dad was killed 4 days before the commencement." And he went on and got his chiropractic and came back and worked for Dr. Pellet, and he also worked for Dr. Light. They were both the chiropractors here. And then he moved on to Kingman. And I said, "Have you ever had any children?" "No." He said, "Early days of X-ray kind of took care of that." Those old doctors, I asked Ray Allen about that, and he said, yeah, a lot of times they had no idea that they needed a guard with lead, you know, in front of it. And a lot of MDs and chiropractors were sterilized because of that. But I need to go back and see the old guy again. It would really, that was really kind of a great thing to see him like that. Well, can you remember you know how old I was? 4 months old. I remember real well. That reminds me, my mom used to take dampened sheets and put over the cribs. That was her air filter.
Just talking about incidents about stealing stuff, taking stuff, you know, were you in on the watermelon thing with me?
No, I didn't.
You missed out on
That's
that.
right.
Well, anyway, I always begged to go along with my brother Jim. I thought probably Paul was in on this. He was in on about everything else.
No, I wouldn't have that.
Well, you missed that. Anyway, Rodney Smith and Jim and Theo Bloom and some of them all one Sunday afternoon decided that they wanted to go get some watermelons. So we went down to Oklahoma and they were getting watermelons, and the farmer showed up, of course, so they all run for the pickups. Well, I was little, of course, then a little past them, and I ran too. But when I went to jump on the pickup, I was used to Chevrolet and GMC pickups, and if you know the pickups for that era, international running boards do not go all the way to the back.
Well, you had Smith's.
And I jumped on Rodney Smith's International and no running board. So underneath the wheel I went.
Oh, nice.
And I got run over.
Oh, boy.
But we were in soft sand, and of course, hard-headed as I was, well, it didn't hurt me. So knocked me out. And
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
I never will forget Jim. I woke up just long enough before they picked me up and took me from Liberal. Anyway, old Jim was looking over and he said, "Are you dead yet?" And I still remember it. "Are you dead yet?" No, I didn't think so. Anyway, just crazy stuff that happened years ago.
Well, I never was very ornery. I did have one.
You just missed out.
What's so funny? Anyway, Rodney Smith and Phil Bloom and I, we were on a Boy Scout thing out, and we were in Manitou. And there was this antique store. I went in there, and they had this old Spanish-American War gun, rifle. It had a bayonet on it. It was what they call a 50-70 caliber. And the date was 1884, but they said they used it in the Spanish-American War. So I bought it for 30 bucks. Well, and you could take a .410 shell and take the shot out of it, and boy, would that make a noise. It fit, a .410 fit right in there. So, on St. Hawkins Day, up here at Liberal High School, on the west door of the high school building, I brought the gun, and I stuck it in the door, and I had that .410 shell, and boom! It just exploded. And I ran. Nobody ever knew it was me. I got out.
Oh.
And can you imagine what would happen to a kid.
Oh, today? Yeah. You was in pretty good trouble.
Yeah. Well, the cattle business, of course, we were always into cattle. We always had cattle, and our corrals were all wood. Our chutes were very crude. They were almost like a guillotine thing you'd bring down on their neck and hold them down. And poor animals, they really suffered a lot of times the way we handled them in those days. No electric irons. Everything was hot irons from a stove, or either, you had a stove or just a campfire. And you'd brand them and neuter them and all this sort of thing. And there was one shot that you'd give, and that was for blackleg. Nowadays, like my corrals are all metal corrals. Our chute is hydraulically operated. Very humane, everything about it, and it's very quiet. And we can work 300 or 400 head in about 5 hours with that chute. And so the cattle business and the feeding, we used to calve in the wintertime, like in March and April, because we always wanted to have big calves when we weaned them. We like to wean them at 450 pounds, 500. Well, a man by the name of Kit Fayrow at Cheyenne Wells, Colorado, developed a program that he says, why are you guys still calving in the winter, in March especially? Go to calving in the latter part of April and June. And so we did. We have found very little difference in weight by doing that. It's amazing. And because the mothers start in on green grass, and they've got more milk, the calves grow faster than they were when you were feeding them out on dry ground. And Kit Fayrow really has quite an idea with the cattle industry.
Paul, you said that you only shot them for one thing back there, and that was blackleg. How many things do you shoot them for today?
Well, for example, one thing we do, we pour a solution on their back, which takes care of all insects, with grubs, anything like that. Then we give them a shot. There's all kind of, I guess, new diseases, but anyway, we give about 3 shots now. I have to honestly tell you that I have retired from that. My daughter and Matt Fitzgerald are in charge of the cattle business, and it's bigger than I ever had it when I was doing it. So I don't even go out and watch them. Matt one day told me, he says, you know, maybe you better not be in the corral. I guess I wasn't fast enough. And from that day on, I really haven't been out there. We feed them at noon, got about 10 or 12 cowboys. Today, when they're working calves, we don't go through chutes. They rope and drag. They have a cowboy ropes their hind legs, he drags them, and then we've got a metal yoke. And it's kind of interesting. That's one time I go out and watch them. And they bring up there, and then this yoke goes on their neck, and it's got a inner tube as a rubber band, and it stretches out, and the guy leaves them there, and then all the guys that are giving shots or castrating, all they got to do is turn them over on the side, brand them, shoot them, and castrate them, and then turn them loose. Going. They can work. We've worked as many as 400 head in one day, and that takes about 6 cowboys to do that. You got 2 guys roping, 2 guys on the fork, and 2 people with the medicines. So it's a pretty efficient way of doing it. The way I used to do it, run them through the chute. It was pretty slow.
Guys, I was wondering, over the last 5 decades, what kind of, has the industry, basically farmers here and ranching in Liberal, has it declined, stayed the same? What have you seen? I mean, have people left the farming business here or the ranching business?
We've had a lot of people that retired. a lot of people that have left, but what's happened is young guys are getting bigger. That's what I said, that one 90, he lives in Stevens County. He's got 90 quarters, and you've got people up by Moscow, 60 quarters. I mean, these people are all getting bigger and bigger, and the guy who used to farm 320 acres is gone. There's no, you can't make a living at it. And so the little guy is not there anymore.
Is there a lot of consolidation, or they're just buying this bigger plot of land and just going for it?
A lot of them, they rent the land from some of these people, and some of them are buying it. Of course, we've witnessed sales of $30,000 an acre. We witnessed sales in northern Stevens County, $4,300 an acre. The Omega Ranch, well, the buyer isn't here, is probably one of the worst pieces of ranch in Seward County. It sold for $1,800 an acre. Did you know that?
I didn't.
That's what it brought.
How many times has it been sold in the last 20 years?
Yeah, living, then it went on about 4 or 5 times. The last guy that bought it was from Delaware. This guy that bought it was from Georgia. He bought it sight unseen.
Really?
The speculators are out there. There's land being sold at Moscow, when is it, next week?
Yeah.
2,200 acres, the moss land. The guys that bought it about 8 years ago, paid $2,000 an acre for it. Everybody thought, wow. Well, the prediction now is, because one man has already said, I'm going to bid $4,000 bucks. But the prediction is, it'll bring 5,000. So look at that turnover those guys in Indiana are going to make. They bought it for 2, going to sell it for 5. Fast money. But I wonder, when is it going to end?
It'll come down. It did in the
Everything goes up, comes down.
It did in the 80s.
Yeah.
The 80s it busted and went. Irrigated ground and stuff was selling for $2,000 an acre. We thought it was too high, and then it got down to that same ground and was bringing $900 an acre.
Yeah.
So it happens.
Is that good for the community?
Well, it's good for the guy that owns the ground, but it's not good for local yokels, because no farmer can make it work. If you spend that kind of money, and let's say corn would drop to, and all this we're talking about is irrigated, and corn would drop to $3 a bushel, for example, it wouldn't pencil out at all. And you just, let's say that you had $5 million bucks, and you had it in bonds or some kind of investment. You had the cash. So now then, you want to transfer it into something solid, so you buy this $5 million worth of land, thinking that my income off of farming is going to be more than the interest I was getting, let's say at 1% or 2% interest. And that's what's going to happen. They're not going to make it.
Well, we don't have anything to worry about, because we're going to finish what we started the last 4 years. So things are just going to get better for the next 4 years.
Guaranteed.
The best way, if you can't say something good about somebody, just going to say it.
Yeah.
Your mother taught you well.
No, I was talking to Dean Welch the other day, General Welch, and asked him some political questions. And he said, my mother said, if you can't say something good about somebody, don't say anything. Well, that's enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think.
Did anyone have any questions for Paul or Bob, or any kind of things that they want to pass along or ask?
When I was in that office, they were still planting mallow on 40-inch rows. They don't do that anymore?
Oh, no.
Really?
No, they're down to, some of them are at 20-inch rows.
Really?
Yeah, most of it's 30.
40.
And you know these combines today, a combine today has a GPS, all these tractors got GPS, by the way. And I was talking to a guy today who had a combine, John Deere, by the way, and Challenger, whereas if like this is your field and you're cutting, and this is the edge of your headers right here, you can stay within an inch of that. Never put your hand on the steering wheel. GPS will keep that going straight. When it gets to the end of the field, you just sit there and it'll turn around and come back like this, turn around. You never touch the steering wheel. You're there maybe to stop and start. But most of them,
Regulate the air conditioner.
yeah, or TV,
Yeah.
or, I mean,
Or finish your book.
now, a friend of mine at Sterling, my cousin, he used to farm up there, and the neighbor had his GPS and he went to sleep and ran across the county road. Ran on across. Woke him up.